lived in a fantasy that he was a big gangster.
If you're asking me if I felt threatened in Derek Barnstable's presence, yes.
I heard him say several times that he would give up his life for Derek.
He put a gun up to my head and just started singing, rapping to this tune, and he would just go nuts.
Wanted to know everything he could about the Crips and the Bloods. You know, this was the only thing that ever gave this kid a sense of power in his whole life.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Jerome Foundation.
He was 16 years old, from an Appleton high school. He allegedly belonged to a gang. That cost him his life.
My mother called from our hometown, Appleton, Wisconsin, with frightening news. 3 teenagers had been shot to death in Plowman Park, a place where I used to play as a child. By the next day, a 4th kid was found dead, and local police said street gangs were involved. I was stunned. Gang violence is common enough in the big city, where I live now, but certainly not in the rural Midwest, or so I thought.
4 kids dead, gunshot, gangs. People here were just appalled, that something like that could happen in Appleton.
Appleton, Wisconsin, population 70,000, is a city of leafy parks and quiet neighborhoods. A mostly white middle-class community with a booming economy and a low crime rate. In my mind, gangster shootings happened in Chicago or LA, not here in Appleton, not in the Fox River Valley, and especially not in Plowman Park. It's a county park at the edge of town where the suburbs meet the surrounding farmland, a place for swimming or family reunions.
The investigation began Thursday when a maintenance worker at Plowman Park found 3 teenagers in a car. Shane Gray, Danny Gregorich, and Mitch Weller were all shot in the head.
A fresh bullet hole was found in the windshield. Police eventually removed 2 bodies and 1 handgun from the scene at about 7 p.m. They say it's still too early to tell what happened here.
Gang-related, could be drug-related, could be boyfriend-girlfriend related. We don't know that yet.
Of the 3 victims found inside, only one, 18-year-old Shane Gray of Appleton, was alive. He was taken to an area hospital.
The word on the street, though, is the shootings were gang-related.
It's a thug life, something we've lived for, and something he had to die for.
Shane Gray, LD, and Mitch, they're reality. And what happened to them is reality. And if anybody thinks that it's not, they need to come and see when they're in that coffin.
This is what my cousin died before. He died for this, because he had some respect and a little love. And somebody obviously didn't have it to do what they had to do.
And what was this, I wondered? Appleton is less than 0.4% black. But here were white Midwestern boys, kids that would have been greasers in my day, acting and talking gangsta rap. This was clearly not the Appleton that I left 20 years ago. How typical are these kids in small-town America? As the story of the DMAC crew unfolded, I'd learn more about Appleton's version of thug life.
Shane Gray, LD, and Mitch, they're reality. And what happened to them is reality. And if anybody thinks that it's not...
The story starts here at the home of a 17-year-old high school junior named Derek Barnstable. Known as D-Mac to his friends, Barnstable led a gang called the D-Mac Crew. D was for Derek. Mac, or Mac Daddy, is gangster speak for a ladies' man. Other members of the gang included Derek's neighbor and best friend, Danny Gregorich, another friend from childhood, Shane Gray, and 2 newer recruits named Mitchell Weller and Jonathan Kinney. A few months before the murder, the DMAC crew began hanging out with a kid named Jermaine Gray, a 17-year-old who had recently moved up from Milwaukee. Jermaine Gray was no relation to Shane Gray. Jermaine Gray ran afoul of the DMAC crew over drug money, and because he ridiculed the small-town crew's gang aspirations.
Apparently, at some time, either in April or May, they had a meeting where they decided that they should kill Jermaine Gray. The information was that Jonathan Kinney was asked to vote on that and initially indicated that he didn't want to be involved, and so he was beaten after that.
On a warm evening in early May, 3 members of the DMAC crew, Shane Gray, Danny Gregorich, and Mitchell Weller, drove Jermaine to a remote cabin.
One of the members of DMAC crew's family had a cabin up in the Oconto County area.
According to police, while Jermaine sat on a couch smoking a joint, Shane Gray sneaked up from behind and strangled him with a belt. The boys dragged Jermaine outside, stabbed him, slashed his throat, and smashed his head with rocks. They hid the dead body underneath the cabin and took off. Late that night, back in Appleton, the 3 hooked up with Derek and Jonathan Kinney at this motel. According to the police report, Danny told Derek, "The nigger boy is dead." In the week that followed, Derek panicked. He ordered his crew back to the cabin to dispose of Jermaine's body. They moved the corpse to a farm owned by Danny Gregorich's grandparents. They burned Jermaine's body and buried it in an old grain silo.
According to Mr. Kinney, they thought this was also a good time to get him involved in the actual murder plot and the concealment of the body, so they ordered him to come up as well. His involvement was actually to pour the gasoline and to take a lighter and to light the body on fire. At some point in time, apparently Mr. Gregorich, the grandfather, called down to the Gregorich house and indicated that he had seen Danny up here, and it seemed kind of odd that he was up here and they were across the road doing something by the silo.
Our sources say when Gregorich heard this, he met Weller and Shane Gray back at this Appleton home and vowed they would never go to jail. It was then they made a pact to end their lives. That's when they went to Plowman Park.
To the Appleton police, this story started with 3 bodies in a Mercury Link station wagon here at Plowman Park. Jermaine Gray's body, up north on the Gregorich farm, was discovered the next day. Police suspected that the deaths were linked, but who shot them and why? Investigators naturally focused on the 2 surviving members of the DMAC crew, Jonathan Kinney and DMAC himself, the gang's leader, Derek Barnstable. Both juveniles quickly admitted to conspiring to murder Jermaine Gray. They gave nearly identical statements to police, detailing what had happened that night and during the subsequent cover-up. Meanwhile, authorities were unraveling what happened that morning at Plowman Park.
The evidence that we collected at the scene and had examined strongly suggested that or supported the double homicide-suicide theory.
The preliminary investigation suggested that Shane Gray shot Mitchell Weller and Danny Gregorich before killing himself. But police lacked enough evidence to really prove this theory. People in Appleton invented their own explanations. What do you think did happen?
It was set up. Triple murder. It was set up. It was all set up. Yep. Derek set him up.
Everybody has like different versions. I don't know, most of it's just gossip, but nobody has no real answers to what happened.
While police puzzled over what had happened that morning in the park, the residents of Appleton faced a deeper question. What was happening to their town?
Some people were really shocked. Some people were angry that this was allowed to happen. Why? Where were the parents? Why didn't the schools do something about it? Why weren't the police involved? How could this happen in our community? It was a horrible, horrible story.
Some people were surprised. Some people were shocked. Most of the adults were shocked. It was like a break in a shell. Shock.
Shocked, obviously, that this could happen here in the Valley.
I don't recall ever knowing something like this happening nearby with people who could have been, you know, your neighbors or anybody around here.
But I think from all the evidence in this case, it certainly points to the fact that this defendant was the major force, the major drive, and the engineer of this conspiracy that resulted in Jermaine Gray's death. It's hard to tell what could have happened to him in his upbringing that would have caused him to be this evil, but he certainly turned out this way.
He's Danny's friend.
Yeah. They grew up together. You know, they're friends, you know. Played together, were neighbors. They did skateboarding, and they'd come over. You know, Derek was at our house a lot, and Danny was back and forth to his house, and, you know, they were buddies.
He was like, I think 4 or 5, he said, when his mom left. And I think he tried living with the mom and the stepdad, and the mom made the comment that the stepdad couldn't stand him. I think it stuck in him that first she left, and then she was making a conscious decision to choose this new man over him.
Very last page, we're going to do the essay questions first.
Diane Spencer had Derek Barnstable and John Kinney in her special ed classroom at Appleton East High School. Jonathan was dyslexic, and Derek was paralyzed by math. Both boys had trouble managing their tempers. Danny Gregorich, also a student at East, attended regular classes. Diane Spencer's job is to help her students with their emotional problems, so she gets to know her kids as well as any teacher can.
Dealing with all that anger, Joe.
The Derek I knew when he was in class with me was different, apparently, than the Derek that everybody else knew out in the community. When I first met Derek, he was almost kind of afraid. He was kind of borderline depressed. He made numerous references to the fact that his dad sat down in a chair and turned on the television and drank beer and just fell asleep in front of the TV.
If you're asking me if I felt threatened in Derek Barnstable's presence, yes.
He was a real angry kid, and he felt real bad about himself because he had a lot of academic delays. It was real hard to get him to do work because he didn't want anybody else to know he had these problems.
What I saw was that Danny was kind of an anchor for Derek and someone who kind of kept him from being just too radical.
He was late for school because of, you know, he felt he had to get Derek up and get him off to school. Well, you know, that was just, he always did that stuff. They'd call back and forth to make sure he was ready. And
I had him come across the hall, come into our room and work with Derek and do math and things. Danny was real strong in math, and Derek wasn't as strong in math. So it worked out kind of nice because Derek was less hesitant to try if he had Danny sitting next to him. They were a real good support for one another.
I had many contacts with Danny because of problems that occurred in school. I grew to appreciate Danny and like him. He had a real neat sense of humor.
Danny we knew when Shane was just little, probably 9, 10. He used to live a few blocks away from us, and he was just a tiny little thing, red hair, freckles, cute. It's hard to believe he'd be involved in something like this, too.
He would have been so much cooler if he would have not been in that gang stuff. But there was no way you could pull him and Derek apart.
Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing.
Here is when I brought Shane home from the hospital. His very first picture at Kmart, 1st and 2nd grade. There's his friends in Iowa. This was his girlfriend at the time.
And one of those girls had a baby.
Right.
Was Shane into his baby or into being a father?
Shane, yes. Shane grew up without his father. And he swore to me if he ever had a child, he would be there for that child. That's the main reason we moved back to. He wanted to be with Kyla.
Shane's family moved away for a few years, but came back to Appleton when Shane turned 16. He fell right back in with his old childhood friends, only now they weren't just skater boys anymore.
The last 2 weeks, he wasn't open with me like we used to be. Mm-hmm. We could talk about anything.
Mm-hmm. Later on, you figured out they were getting into some drug dealing.
I know they smoked marijuana. I know it. I never seen them, but I know they did.
I was raised in this society, so there's no way you can expect me to be a perfect person, but I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
So I knew something was up. That's why I asked him when that phone call came, I said, is D-Mac in some kind of trouble? And he just totally lost it. I never seen my son like that before. And he just got right in my face that I thought, if I thought it was any of your fucking business. And he never talked to me like that either. He'd let me know. So I thought, well, fine, I'll let him cool down, and we'll talk about it later when he comes home. Well, he never came home. This is his hat, his ashes, some of the flowers from the funeral, his blue rag. His camel canister. What else do you want me to say?
We said, yeah, we'd love to have them. And that's how they came into our home as foster children at the ages, they were about 2.5 and 4.5.
And this was Mitchell and his half-sister?
Right. Mitchell was 2.5 and the sister was 4.5. And the foster care system, we didn't get a lot of information about what actually happened. We knew they were neglected and abused, but we didn't have specifics. But over the years, we found out the specifics. Jennifer, when she was 13, 14, in that age range, remembered a lot of the abuse, the sexual abuse and the drug abuse and alcohol parties and many men being in the apartment. And Mitchell, because he couldn't do anything when he was littler, they could put him in a crib and he was out of sight. And the 2 older girls were allowed to have done to them whatever anybody wanted to do.
And you didn't know any of this?
No. I think what happened is that he could never form any bonds. He could never form a loving relationship with anyone, and I think that was going to follow him through his whole life.
That was about 8th grade was when he became the disruptive, and that's when he had the 2 shoplifting convictions and a lot of trouble with the teachers.
The Wellers were part of the Appleton that I knew well. They're typical of the Valley's prosperous working class, folks who can afford a backyard pool, but are still earthy enough to tend a vegetable garden.
This was our pumpkin patch. I had about 8 rows of pumpkins and squash I used to grow here. When Mitchell was young, he used to help me out here. I think when he was in kindergarten, we took pumpkins into school and all the kids made their Halloween pumpkins out of them. If you want to see down here, a year ago we had Mitchell cremated at the funeral. These white ashes are still a few of his remains.
One of the officers that was kind of trying to explain things to us said that even in the pictures of the group together, and there was one in the paper, Mitchell, the rest were kind of hanging together and Mitchell was always separate. He was always kind of off. And the rest were all buddy-buddy, giving the gang sign, doing things like that. Where he was, just like he was in Little League, always off to the side.
You know, like John, we had just met him like the Halloween before.
Right. John Kinney?
Yeah. He came over we had a Halloween party. Danny and me always decorated for Halloween.
We've been fighting since day one. There's going to be fighting since till everybody dies.
So what, to have your family, you got to get beat up to get in and beat up to get out?
John Kinney came from a stable family. His father is a paper industry executive, and his mother is a registered nurse. Being black in an all-white town was difficult for Jonathan. He had a passive personality and a powerful yearning to blend in, so Jonathan was easily manipulated by the DMAC crew.
I see him as being a victim of this whole thing. He didn't feel accepted. He latched onto this group because they accepted him. I saw them as being abusive towards him. Because he was black, they would refer to him as a chimp. They would call him names in reference to his skin color.
I think we believe in our county that Jonathan Kinney was more actively involved in the homicide, at least from a standpoint of not doing anything to prevent it, which we believed that he could have done. Outagamie County, I think, believed that Jonathan was a little less involved and that he tried to withdraw, and felt pressure that he could not completely withdraw and couldn't turn them in because he felt threatened.
Driving through downtown Appleton, my first trip here to visit Lawrence University, see if I wanted to go to school there, it fit my idealized image of what a hometown America would be. I mean, it was just, it just looked very secure, very comfortable, very like the kind of place you could set roots down and be happy.
The Norman Rockwell Appleton of my youth was an all-white community. Back then, ethnic diversity meant either Catholic or Lutheran.
Was struck by how white it was, and it still is very white. And I mean, not just in color, but attitudes. It's very Republican, very conservative. I'm not sure if they actually got Joe McCarthy out of the courthouse yet or not, but I know that was a huge controversy, whether to put him in the museum or keep him in the courthouse where lots of people thought he belonged.
The Valley is one of the fastest growing areas in the state of Wisconsin.
One only has to drive around Appleton and see all of the homes being built. It is, we have, I think, the first or second largest growing school district in the state.
Our unemployment is for all practical purposes at zero. I think it's 2.4, 2.6%, which means that basically anybody who wants to find a job here basically can find a job.
Obviously, we've grown just in terms of population and spread out considerably. We've had significant increase in our immigrants that have moved to the community among Laotian.
Yes, we have some African Americans moving in, and yes, we have a large subculture of Asians.
And there's a Hispanic population coming in too, I think, slowly. Appleton's a city that's going through growing pains. I mean, wonderful things have happened. We've become less homogeneous. We're very much a transient community. I mean, with the corporations, they're often moving families in and out.
There are those who seem to think that this is still Appleton of the 50s and 60s, and it's not. Appleton is still a nice community, but it's changing, and kids are changing.
When the DMAC Crew story hit Appleton, the community and the media focused their attention on local teenagers. There was a lot of talk about the kids who hang out downtown and whether or not gangs were part of that scene.
It's called the North Lot. It's a public-owned city parking lot, and this is the only one that the kids have been sanctioned that they can loiter in.
When you meet a lot of people from different cities, this is where we all come together.
One thing you have to realize about our area, it's just not Appleton. There are a whole series of towns that are all connected, and basically there's just a line drawn through them to differentiate the different towns. You know, everything from Neenah through Menasha, Grand Chute, Town of Menasha, Appleton, Kimberly, Little Chute, combined Locks, and into Kaukauna. That whole area is basically one community. About 150,000 people.
If you got a nice car, you just, you know, you show it off, or you just drive around looking for people you know, and some guys look around for girls, and I'm sure girls do the same thing.
I'm working on it.
So those kids up there say that you guys are gangbangers and shit.
Oh yes, we're the big gangsters, we're the big gangers.
Yeah, big G.
Yeah, we're big G's, big G's.
At first, the cruising scene and the North Lot didn't seem that much different to me from the Appleton I knew as a teenager. But I soon recognized that where my generation divided itself into hippies and jocks, for kids in Appleton today, the world is a tangle of elaborate social distinctions.
The jocks that will hang out in their groups, you have the hippies, you have the anarchists.
We got like the grungies and the preppies and just kind of like people that are just kind of in the middle. And
they're the gangbangers and the fake gangbangers. I think most of the gangbangers are fake gangbangers. We call them G-Moneys or G-Funks.
Studio gangsters, cardboard gangsters, just people who want to live that life. But at the end of the night, they go home to their parents' house with the 3-car garage.
There are probably anywhere between 35 to 45 hardcore gang members living in this community, with maybe twice that would be lesser involved people, so they're in, they're out. So we're not talking a large percentage of the juvenile or young adult population, maybe 1 to 2% of the kids in the area.
To a point, I think gangs are wrong because the fact that they have to kill people and get in fights over the stupidest things. If you look at people in a gang the wrong way, they'll be all over you just like that.
I think it's just friends, you know, and I think it's a way that they can feel protected and they know that someone is there for them.
Why do you need to be protected? I mean, you don't need to be protected. Why does someone want to be protected? From what?
I don't know, that's a really good question because there's not a whole lot of stuff in Appleton that you can be protected from. I mean, you can walk the streets down here at midnight and you're not going to get hurt, but...
4 to 11, dude.
Yeah, but you're gullible enough to...
As I talked to kids downtown about gangs, I had no way of knowing what was just loose talk and what was real. But underneath all the adolescent bravado, I heard an authentic and consistent refrain: violence. These kids, even the basically good kids, are familiar with violence in a way my friends and I never were.
Somebody down here has a problem with somebody, and then they're in a gang or whatever they want to call it, so they can have this kid have the crap beaten out of them, and it's sort of like a power play.
I seen a 13-year-old boy die. I lost my cousin and 2 of my friends.
And they raped her and they beat her so that they couldn't recognize her when they got up to the apartment to find her.
My father's got a really bad temper, and if you look at him wrong, he'll just haul off and he'll hit you.
Finally, after they done all that, they strangled her to death.
They can get like beat in the head 4 times or in the chest 9 times.
I know a girl personally who put someone in the hospital already just because they had a disagreement, and she was this close to dying.
Did you know the guys who got shot last spring?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Who'd you know?
I knew all of them. I knew all of them. Jazz, Quick, LD, and
I spent a lot of time downtown looking for gang kids to talk to. But if there are any hardcore gangs operating in Appleton, they don't give interviews, they commit crimes. The police were cracking down hard after the Plum and Park shootings. The last thing that thugs like this wanted was a TV camera in their face. Then I met Travis Willard.
So what are we gonna do tonight?
Travis Willard is a 19-year-old former gang leader. Travis quit the Appleton thug life and now works at a Shakey's Pizza. He and his girlfriend live in a trailer north of Appleton. At one time, Travis was the leader of a gang that included future members of the DMAC crew.
We recruited like DMAC, LD, Quick, the recent people in the Plum Park incidents. Some other gang associates introduced me to them. They started hanging around us. They decided that's the lifestyle that they wanted. They were pretty loyal to us and got along pretty well.
My fault.
Teresa Lamers met and started dating Travis Willard while she was still in junior high.
Good, made $30 in tips last night.
Through Travis, she became part of a group of friends that started hanging out in Derek Barnstable's basement.
They didn't come into my life as the DMAC crew. They came into my life as Teresa's friends that she met at Skate City, and they were cool.
They were cool. We always met in their basement, and they'd always be smoking pot. We just hung out. I don't know. You don't really say much around them guys. You just watch them and laugh at them and never disagree with them.
Later, the boys who would become the DMAC crew tried to initiate her into the gang, but with the help of her mother, she resisted and broke off all ties with the gang. So Derek lived separately from his father. I mean, he had his own room.
Well, he lived, for the most part, he stayed in the basement.
What I was told, it was dark, drabby, all kinds of pictures hanging all over. A machete on one table, not what I would call a normal kid's bedroom.
It was his whole house. He never went upstairs. Him and his dad had no communication at all. If the phone was for Dean, his dad, which was probably 1 out of 100 times, he would take a broomstick and pound on the ceiling, and Dean would know what it was because that was it for communication. That's all them guys had. They never talked. I didn't even know Derek had a mom the whole time.
Derek does have a mother, though his friends rarely saw her. Later, at Derek's court appearances, she often sat beside her husband. Derek's father and his stepbrother were also present in court. None of them wanted to talk to me.
I knew he had a brother, Keith. because he came down there once in a while, and the girls would always be on one side of the basement on this couch, and the guys would always be around the table. And he'd be like, what is this, 50 cents? Girls on one side, guys on the other, but it just really didn't mix. They just did their own thing. They wanted us there, though, just to be there, just to watch them.
The bell would ring and they'd have student movement, maybe like 5 minutes in between classes. Derek never left the room. He always stayed in the room by me. The next year, the following year...
Why wouldn't he leave?
He was afraid. He was afraid of everything. He was afraid of other kids. And by, I'd say about the middle of his junior year then, he became a much more self-assured.
He turned into somebody that was trying to be a strong man. He lived in a fantasy that he was a big gangster. And
they called him like wannabe gangbangers, because that's when Derek was just starting to get into it, you know, and he was identifying with a lot of the stuff that you see like on MTV and that.
Smoking weed, that's about all they did, and listening to rap music and just getting crazy. Derek would get crazy when music came on. That would get him nuts, like totally nuts. He'd put a gun up to my head and just start singing, rapping to this tune, and he would just go nuts. He'd put a chainsaw to my neck, knives.
Extorting money from other students, threatening to kill other students. A teacher threatening to cut her face up.
I got beat up for smoking the wrong kind of cigarette.
What would you do when he put a gun to your head or a chainsaw?
Nothing. I would just sit there. I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't move until... Because he changes right away, and then it's like he's just kidding around. But he's so serious when it's like he's just nuts.
you know, and I try to tell her, that's not right. That's not the way it is. That's not the way guys treat girls.
He wasn't a follower, he's more of a leader, so he became right-hand, second leader pretty much. He had a lot of control. He, like myself, was pretty much, I don't know, mastered the art of persuasion you know, get into people's minds, make them follow, make them loyal.
How did you do that?
Just from being with them day to day, showing them that we're there for them. And people began to get so loyal that they would actually kill for us. There was an attempt to kill someone for us, volunteers before.
He thought very highly of Derek. Like I said, I heard him say several times that he would give up his life for Derek. D-Mac, he always called him. I didn't even know for a long time that his name was Derek. And I thought that was strange. I mean, how far would he take it? Would he actually die for this kid? Well, obviously.
Do you think D-Mac got off on that? I mean, it sounds like he did. Really liked that control and...
Yeah. I'm sure the power started going to his head.
He's the one who would go the step beyond. I mean, a lot of people might think about doing something, but Derek was the one who would do it. Kids generally followed him, they listened to him, they did what he said. Kids who were older than him, bigger than him physically, would also be afraid of him.
What was the gang called at that time?
Imperial Gangsters.
And it was Travis's gang, he was a leader.
Yep.
Well, you split up then, right?
Yeah. He wanted more power than he had. He wanted his own like I had.
And so?
And so they decided they wanted to go to GD.
Gangster disciple. He wanted to know everything he could about the Crips and the Bloods and the GDs. And I mean, he wanted to know the history. He never wanted to read, except now all of a sudden he wanted to read. He wanted to know this stuff. He was like thirsty. You know, this was the only thing that ever gave this kid a sense of power in his whole life.
Tell me how they hooked up with GD and Jazz Gray and that whole thing.
Well, I think they met him through some people and got in under Jazz. And I guess Jazz was ripping them off and showing them disrespect. And a gang's supposed to be like family, brothers, stick together.
Shane had first mentioned to me that he was in a gang. Obviously, my first question was, well, are you out on the streets vandalizing or doing terrible things like gangs are associated with?
So what attracted you to want to hang with the gang in the first place?
Basically, I just had some time. I mean, as long as you know the people who are in it and know they're not corrupted like the stereotype claims.
Many of the kids I talk to are wannabes. To me, the term means more, or perhaps less, than wannabe gangster. Like all kids, they want to be accepted. They want to be respected, to be part of something bigger than themselves. In some cases, they want to be black or they want to be white, and they all want to be loved.
The kids are searching in other areas for things that they don't find at home.
And if you don't have anything at home, you know, you don't have anything at all.
And you aren't finding having those needs met in a positive way, they're going to be met in a negative way.
They look to other people, and they actually care about each other. I mean, they watch out for you and everything, and you watch out for them.
So tell me a little bit about your growing up, your home situation.
There ain't really much to say. Basically, I lived with my ma because she didn't want my dad around. And then I ended up living in a group home, and now I'm here.
The gang has become their surrogate family. They're loyal. They have rules. If they break the rules, there's punishment for those rules.
It's not just a bunch of drinking. It's not just a bunch of fighting. It's not just a bunch of being tough. It's laws, and it's learning, and it's using that learning to make yourself a better person.
It isn't all about that they use you or anything, but in some cases it is.
And he assured me no. It was just like a brotherhood, someone to get together with and talk over their troubles, and just someone there to listen.
Gangs certainly seem out of place with the image we have of Appleton, but people here and in other Valley communities began noticing signs of gang activity about 5 years ago. Graffiti on some buildings, kids hanging out.
Before the killings in May 1995, local politicians tried to downplay gangs in Appleton. If there was a problem, they said, it was due to outsiders, code speak for blacks, coming up from Chicago and Milwaukee.
There's no question that a lot of this activity is linked to the gangster disciples out of Chicago. Green Bay seems to be kind of the focal point, but it's spread down through the valley, and we have it. That's a fact of life.
But the circumstances in Jermaine Gray's murder were the exact opposite of what mostly white Appleton would have expected. The victim was a black kid from Milwaukee. The murderers were local whites.
DMAC crew was a splinter group of the black gangster disciples. And the key there is the word black, in that most of the members of the DMAC crew were white.
I think after Plowman, it wasn't quite so easy to blame all the problems on the outsiders coming in. These kids were mostly from the area. And then I think people maybe needed to do a little more soul searching about what's really happening right here.
I don't like that picture. Because, for one, they're all hugged up, and they're supposed to be friends. Those three are flashing gang singles, and Jermaine is not. And the look he has on his face is phony as two left shoes. It doesn't look like Jermaine at all. It's like he's fronting for that pose. But whoever took that picture, I'd like to know who took that picture.
Jermaine Gray's mother, Florence Morrow, lives on the north side of Milwaukee. In this neighborhood, gangs and gunfire are everyday life.
It starts at 12 o'clock and it doesn't stop till like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Sirens? And you can hear pistol shots? How did Jermaine deal with that? And
that was the rule of the house. When we hear gunshots, we hit the floor. And he said, "Ma, I'm tired of this. You don't have to live like this, you know." He had wanted me to get a gun to protect myself, but I told him, no, not with your little brothers in the house. I didn't want one. I want you to understand that my son was not a gangster. He was a loving person. He was a sweet person. All he did was love. He didn't want to hurt anybody, and if he did want to hurt somebody, it was because they tried to hurt him first. For one, the reason why he left home was to get away from the gangs here. They all would go up there to go out. And then that's when I guess he started, like, you know, meeting all the girls. So from there, he just kept going back and forth up there.
It appears that he was probably given some validity by the local kids because he came from Milwaukee.
Shane brought him in and introduced him. And he thought it was so great. This big black dude had his same last name. Like I said, I didn't know he was even from Milwaukee and why he was in Appleton.
He was black, he came from Milwaukee, therefore he should be a gang member. Unfortunately, that's a stereotype that is quite prevalent, I think, among the kids here.
He was going to try to go to the technical college up there. But he really wanted to stay up there and better his life.
So do you think Jermaine was a real gangster, or you don't know?
I believe he's a real gangster.
Well, we didn't have a lot of information that connected him directly to a gang, and he was a hardcore gang member down in Milwaukee and was tightly involved in gangs. We didn't find anything to really support that.
Jermaine was a pretty ruthless guy, pretty cold-hearted. Someone you really wouldn't want to meet up with in a dark alley.
He may not have been a gang member, but I'm sure he knew of them living in Milwaukee. And all of a sudden he had some status thrust upon him, and I believe he may have started living some of that here, or not necessarily correcting people.
Derek had just come into being. He had just gained some power. He had just gained some acknowledgement. And now this other young man moves in and he threatens all of that. He's moving in on your gang status. He's moving in on your drugs and your weapons and your money. And he's laughing at you. He's publicly ridiculing you to other people. And a real bottom line for me, I guess, is that then he sleeps with your girlfriend.
And then again, I think it has to do with his girlfriend, Barnstable's girlfriend. Because, in fact, she's supposed to be liking Jermaine, and he didn't like that.
Derek had, it was the weirdest thing, he had a love-hate relationship for black, that sense of blackness. He was in awe of them, and yet he was very intimidated and afraid of them.
All right, keep moving, Rocket. I am a nightmare walking, psychopath talking. King of my jungle, just a gangster, stalking, living life like a firecracker, quick as my fuse. Been dead as a death, back the colors I choose. Colors, 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 colors.
From those movies like Colors and that, you know, he was just so into him. He'd watch him time and time again. He would make comments, and then when I would correct him, he would come back at me with things like, well, you don't understand, Miss Spencer, because it's the Niggers. They get all the, and then he always referred to women as bitches. They get all the bitches. They get all, you know, they get all the money. They get all the good drugs. And he was real resentful of blacks.
Probably because of his anger with the African Americans for doing that to him.
So after his falling out with Jazz and the GD, he
started getting some hatred towards him, probably.
I certainly think that the murder of Jazz was probably partially motivated by the fact that Jazz was black. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that is true.
Which makes Kinney's involvement very complex.
Extremely complex and bizarre. And to some extent, it certainly justifies Kinney's concern that he had to become involved in this crime, or he would himself be a victim. That was going to be the defense if we went to trial.
State of Wisconsin versus Jonathan Kinney, 95, CF 97. Appearances on the purposes...
Jonathan Kinney's case never went to trial. He pleaded guilty to charges of concealing a corpse. Not long after Jonathan's arrest, his father took a job transfer and moved the rest of the family to Texas. I never saw them again. After his family left, Jonathan, a dyslexic teenager with a 4th grade reading ability, faced the court alone with his lawyer and faces prison by himself.
My only hope is that we make a sentence here today to use as a deterrent to gang violence. And for that reason, I believe that the only sentence that I can make here today is sentence you to the maximum of 10 years in the state prison system which is precisely what I'm going to do. The court is going to...
Florence Morrow and her sister-in-law, Constance, left Milwaukee at 4 a.m. the morning of Kinney's sentencing. They drove 5 hours to be in court that day, but they got to the courthouse 5 minutes late and missed the reading of the sentence. You want to talk to me? Come on. This is Jermaine's mother.
Why?
Hey, come on. Back off.
You know it. Good boy. And you know he was good. You know it.
Okay.
No woman, no dog, no nothing is good enough for you to take that boy's life like that. You know. You gonna get it, boy. You dog. You are a dog. You little young punk. You're a punk.
A year after the Plowman Park shootings, the families of the boys involved still had no clear picture of what happened on the morning of May 11th. The police called the shootings a murder-suicide, but the case was still under investigation, and the cops gave out little new information.
It's been a year, 4 months, and they still haven't come to me and told me what is what.
Meanwhile, 17-year-old Derek Barnstable was ordered to stand trial as an adult on charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the death of Jermaine Gray. The families waited for Barnstable's trial date with mixed feelings. While dreading the publicity, they hoped the court testimony might explain what happened in Plowman Park.
God only knows what really happened, and that's the problem.
That's a lot why we don't want to talk about it, because you know, we still have feelings that there could be some. Derek holds the key. He knows something about that day. Whether he was involved in it or not, we have no proof. But we would like to know what he knows that would help us feel better.
In the end, the families never heard Derek Barnstable tell his story.
Today, Barnstable pleaded no contest to conspiracy to commit murder and conspiracy to mutilate a corpse in the death of Jermaine Gray. The amended charges reduce the maximum sentence he faces from life down to 60 years in prison.
With Barnstable pleading no contest, there would be no trial. Instead of life in prison, he was looking at between 30 and 60 years. Now, all that remained was the sentencing.
D-Mac had to have threatened these boys with something to make them think that there was no other way out but to kill themselves. But why wasn't D-Mac there? Why wasn't Joker there? They were all involved in killing Jazz. Why was it just these 3 boys? D-Mac knows more than he's saying, and we'll probably never know what all happened.
So also today ends one of the most shocking, violent, and tragic episodes experienced by our community in a long time. It ends with a whimper, I guess.
Without a trial, the Plowman Park case seemed unresolved. The atmosphere at the sentencing was filled with all the expectancy of a jury verdict. The families and much of Appleton longed for something conclusive in a case filled with loose ends.
Mr. Barnstable?
Which I could turn back the clock to change everything because of all the people I've hurt. I know I deserve to be punished for my involvement in my wrongdoing, but I would like you to know some things about me before you sentence me. Truly a different person inside. I've grown up and I've learned a lot. Over a year and a half I've been incarcerated. I realized what I did was wrong, and I realized that being a leader of a gang is not cool or the right way to live life. Your Honor, again, I know I need to be punished for my sins. My heart has sincerely changed. I'm truly sorry for what I've done. Thank you, Your Honor.
I very sincerely believe, Mr. Barnstable, that we need to react very strongly to what is going on within our community within gangs. It is for that reason, on count 1 in the information, this court hereby sentences you to 45 years in state prison system. The court, on count 2, withholds sentence, place you on probation for a period of 15 years. That probation will be consecutive to the sentence on count 1. Okay, we are in recess. Good luck to you, Mr. Barnstable.
Of the 5 members of the DMAC crew, 3 were dead, 2 in prison. More than 2 years after the shootings, the Plowman Park investigation is still technically open. Appleton's focus is now on the future, on how to discourage younger kids from becoming the next DMAC crew.
I just think that we could do so much more for kids when they're younger. These boys didn't all of a sudden overnight become the people that were able to go out and murder another young man and then able to go out and take their own lives. They had been in the system a long time. Shane had been in the system a long time. Derek had been in special ed a long time. I really believe that there were other things that maybe could have been done earlier on, more preventative type things. Derek Barnstable, at the age of 4 years old, was identified as somebody that needed psychiatric intervention. And there was no one there to advocate for him. And the parents, for whatever reason themselves, weren't in an emotional spot that they could see to it that he got it. Now you're looking at a young man that sat then and simmered for another 13 years until he got to the point where he was able to commit such a heinous crime.
To me, this story isn't about gangs at all, nor is it really about race, nor kids copying what they see on MTV. This story is less about urban gangsters moving into small-town America than fathers and mothers moving out. The Appleton I left 20 years ago would have been just as burdened with broken families and wayward teens. But here's the big change. 20 years ago, the culprit was an absentee father. In the Plowman Park story of today, we have mothers who've left as well. Derek Barnstable's mom and Mitch Weller's biological mother both checked out early in their sons' lives. Shane Gray and Jermaine Gray had moms that did their best but couldn't guide their sons into manhood. And all 4 had fathers that were gone or had failed them. The DMAC crew, the DMAC children, were on their own. So this notion of a gangsta family in Appleton, Wisconsin, that first seemed so ludicrous to me, now sadly rings true. And to know that it's happening in my hometown makes me fear for the future of Appleton and hometowns everywhere. Why are you here today?
I miss my boys. Memories.
Here to show pay our respects and
Keep
let
it
them
real.
know. Yep, let them know we're always here and we'll always remember them.
This is for my homies. This is for my homies. Well, see you when I get there. In that gangster lane, in that gangster lane.
This song's dedicated to my homies in that gangster league. Mitch from NSG, my boy Quick, and my boy LD. And whoever else out there got a homie that's in that gangster league. And our small boys in the pen and they don't even see the street again. Because you know what? It don't matter what they was doing while they was here. They could have been banging or slanging, but they ain't here no more. That's somebody's daddy. That's somebody's baby. That's somebody's homie. So go to let her rest in peace on that gangster league. You know what I'm saying? It's all for real.
This
while Plowman Park made some people wake up to the issue, they also said, well, they didn't come from very good homes, so that's not my kids and I don't have to worry about it. But they do need to worry about it because there are kids of all kinds from all economic backgrounds in this community and all races who are involved in violence.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Jerome Foundation.